Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Thai noodle dish called pad Thai. If you're here in the States, it's a pretty common one. It's probably the most common one that you'll find in most Thai restaurants because it's like kind of the most popular noodle dish to find in the States for like Thai takeout, at least here in California. Today, fortunately, I happen to have been able to locate a couple of very critical ingredients to what goes into a pad Thai, which is going to be this tamarind paste, as well as a little bit of this palm sugar, both of which are absolutely critical ingredients to making an authentic pad Thai. If you can't find those two ingredients, then you're probably making some bastardized, Americanized version of pad Thai, which is essentially what we've been making for quite a while, because those are hard ingredients to track down, unless you find a Thai grocery store, which is what I found. So I'm going to run through all of those things. If you're unfamiliar with the things that we're going to be using, don't worry, because I'll explain them. I'll also run through a couple of good ways of substituting out those things, which I have done many times. So you can take a shot at reproducing the things that we're doing, even if you can't find the things that we're cooking with. So cool. Coming in hot. How's it going? Yeah. Hello. Hello everyone on Reddit and on YouTube too. This, by the way, if this is your first time tuning in, we're always streaming here on Reddit and also on YouTube, concurrently at 6:30 PST every Tuesday. If you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel, that's where all of the recipes live. So every Tuesday we're live streaming, and the Friday that comes prior to it is usually going to be the Friday when we release the recipe video for the thing that we are cooking. So the recipe for this pad Thai came out 3 days ago, last Friday. And we ran through a couple of the techniques that we're going to run through today in a little bit more organized and less rambly in that recipe video. That's what it tends to be. It's more organized, less rambly, and I get less distracted. So if you're looking for that stuff, definitely head over to the YouTube channel. Find those recipe videos because they're really useful. They tend to be super useful for folks who are trying to reproduce or trying to cook the things that we're cooking. That's also where the schedule of live streams lives. So if you want on the scheduled live streams, you can find the ingredients for the things that we're cooking. So some folks have started doing this, where you can cook along with me if you pick up the ingredients beforehand, and then you can cook along with me, provided that I don't skip steps, which is what I did last week and messed a couple folks up. Sorry about that. But I will try not to skip steps today. Last time I skipped a couple of steps because I was lazy and didn't feel like doing that. So here we go. All right, so kicking things off, this is going to be, I'm doubling our recipe today. Oh, by the way, I'm doubling our recipe today because I'm cooking some stuff for our neighbors. So if you're following along with the scheduled live stream and the original recipe, there should be 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic. If you're doubling today, we're going to be using 8 cloves. This doubled recipe should probably feed about like 4 to 6 people, kind of depending on how hungry you are. The original recipe should serve maybe 2 to 3 people. 3 people if you're very hungry. Usually it feeds 3 people when I make it because I'm very hungry. But if you're not very hungry, probably for most people, it's going to serve probably 3 servings. But anyway, back to this. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, actually 8 cloves of crushed and minced garlic. Anytime that we're using garlic in a stir fry like we are right now, you can probably generally, not always, but generally, get away without doing the mince. So if you give it a really, really good crush, the garlic is just going to start coming apart like this. And that's generally going to be okay. Not always, but for the most part, when you're chopping garlic, as long as you crush it real good, that should be enough to do it. With the exception that if you're not planning on stir frying it, then you're probably going to need to do a better mince than that. But if you're throwing this into a stir fry, it's not going to make a huge difference if you don't be real nitpicky with your fine mince. Ooh, fried rice. Ooh, you got the wok. Nice. What kind of wok did you get? Hopefully carbon steel. I love carbon steel. All right. Next up, this is about 2 inches. So in the original recipe should be 1 inch. Today we're doubling. So this is 2 inches of fresh ginger that we're peeling with the flat side of it. Peeling ginger. Don't use your potato peelers for that. Because you don't need to. What we're using, that's the flat side of just a spoon, which is going to be a little bit more dull, but just enough sharpness in order to remove the skin from the ginger, which means that you don't have to be as careful about making sure that you don't peel your skin off, which is what you would have to be doing if you were using a potato peeler. So we're actually going to do our fine mince with our ginger here, which means that we want to actually pay attention to how we're chopping today. So you can't just kind of blindly wing it like we did with our garlic. I'm starting off, this is going to be so you can call it a small dice. Ginger, unlike garlic, is not nearly as delicate, which means that it's not going to fall apart in the wok fry. This will absolutely leave huge chunks of ginger behind if you don't remember to do your fine mince, so don't get lazy on this part. Carbon steel, nice, yeah. Alright, so here's our fine mince. Really the only secret to a good fine mince is just make sure that your knife is real sharp. If your knife isn't sharp and you try and do a fine mince, what ends up happening is that it doesn't actually chop through anything. What you'll end up doing is just smashing the ginger, which will take a lot longer. You'll eventually still get there, but if it's not sharp enough, you kind of just crush it into the cutting board, and that's going to take a lot longer. Alright, that should do it. One more time. Alright, so that should do it. In a real authentic Thai recipe, there probably should not be ginger. Ginger is really originating more from like Chinese wok cooking tendencies, mostly because I always pair it with garlic. In some of the more authentic stuff that we do, especially the Korean and Thai recipes, you'll see me leaving the ginger out because it doesn't belong in a lot of those recipes. More commonly in Thai cooking, you'll probably come across something that is not very similar, but lots of people equate it with ginger, which is galangal, which is like another root veggie that actually looks very similar to ginger. I don't have any today, so I'm using ginger, but to each their own. I also think that it's going to work really well, even though it is not necessarily a super authentic addition to pad thai. Next up, so this is going to be, we're doing 7. This is going to be 7 Thai chilies, which is going to, for the quantity that we're cooking, going to be maybe like a medium heat, so like mild to mild medium heat. If you're following the original recipe, I think I had originally called for something like 4 Thai chilies because we were trying to keep it relatively mild. So depending on your tolerance for heat, this is definitely going to be the one that you want to dial up or down. In one of the original recipes, we had used a jalapeno. You can also do that. You can even use like a Fresno, serrano peppers. All of those things will work just fine. In a more authentic pad thai, or I should say in a really authentic pad thai, there are no chilies in it. They're intended to be left out because pad thai is not intended to be spicy at all. I went ahead and threw these in because I find that Thai chilies are like a really iconic flavor to Thai food, and if you've got them, why not? But if you're like trying to stick to the books with like a super authentic pad Thai, these probably shouldn't belong. Also, if you can't find Thai chilies, I also would just say just leave it out because you don't have to include them. They're absolutely non-essential. And I would honestly go without the chilies instead of just subbing them for a different kind of chili. Cool, so those are our aromatics. By the way, there are a whole shitload of veggies that we have to chop today. So we're gonna be doing it for a while. We're also gonna be chopping some tofu. We got noodles, there's some bean sprouts coming up. Lots of stuff going on, so. This is going to be actually 2 fairly large carrots. We're gonna do a julienne cut on these, which again, very time consuming. And you'll notice anytime that I have to do a julienne cut, I'll probably go out of my way to not do a julienne cut because it's time consuming and annoying. And I'd rather not do it if I don't have to. But the reason that we need the julienne cut today is because the carrots, they have to pair in some form at least with our noodles, which are going to be really thin and delicate. So we don't want big chunks of carrot like we do with like a curry or a stew because they're going to leave for a really weird bite. But if you're being really lazy, this actually just occurred to me. But if you're being really lazy, a lot of the Thai pad Thai takeout that you'll come across, you'll see it done with like a decorative carrot. So it'll be like maybe chopped in the shape of a flower or something, which I'm now realizing might actually be because they didn't feel like doing the julienne cut. That might actually be why. So they chop it like a garnish instead. Alright. I believe you could also get away with using a mandolin for something like this too. I actually don't think I own a mandolin though. Yeah. Cool, so for our julienne cut, what we're doing is we're starting with planks here. We're gonna do this a whole bunch of times, so we have plenty of opportunities to show how to do a julienne cut. We're starting with our planks, then we're folding them over on their side so that they're essentially stacking on top of each other, and then we're chopping down. That's gonna be, as far as I know, the fastest way to do a julienne cut. Somebody knows a faster way, please let me know. Cool. Alright, so one more time, here's our planks. We're starting with slice it down the center. Helps if you could do those straight, which I'm not doing a great job of. Then we're folding them over on their side, so, and chopping down. Yeah. Not my best julienne cut. I'll take it. This is kind of a sloppy julienne cut. It's also a very large carrot. Alright, so those are our julienne carrots. These, by the way, are going to pair really nicely with the super thin chow fun noodles that we're going to be using in a second, because those are super, super delicate. We want to try and create a consistent bite with our veggies today, because if you don't have a consistent bite, by the way, that's always how you end up with like a really unpleasant eating experience, when you have like really large stuff that's mixed with really small stuff, and then it's kind of unclear like what is the plan for how you're supposed to eat something. If you ever had, actually I can think of a couple of dishes that are kind of pose this really weird dichotomy of like, how are you supposed to actually eat this dish? Call you a donut in a Gordon Ramsay voice. I actually don't really know what is the Gordon Ramsay voice. Is that just like a British accent? It would do that if I knew what the Gordon Ramsay voice is. But is that his thing? Does he call people a donut? I don't know. Anyway, next up, what this should be shallots. I did not go out of my way to go pick up some shallots today, as was also the case when we did the original recipe video too. Mostly because the grocery store that carries shallots is another 2 blocks away, so I would have to have walked a full 2 more blocks to go get shallots. So I ended up just buying red onions instead. They are absolutely not the same thing. Shallot is going to be a little bit more mild. It's going to kind of fall into the background a little bit, whereas a red onion like this one is going to be a little bit more aggressive and upfront, which we'll have to address. A shallot is not just a small or miniature onion, as many people think. But if the choices are between a shallot or nothing at all, I go with red onion all the time, and it'll be okay. But if we're trying to keep this more authentic, what it should be is 2 shallots, 2 purple shallots, that is. And what we want to do is try and dice these as small as possible. That is going to kind of emulate what it would look like if you were cooking with a shallot. Let's see. Let's do this next. Next up, this is going to be our tofu. So again, I'm doubling our recipe here, which is why we're using this is going to be a full 2 pounds of tofu. If you're following the original recipe, this should just call for 1 pound of tofu. And what we're going to do here, so this is my trick for creating crispy tofu. What we're going to do is sort of borrow from another very, very iconic form of cooking, which is Mongolian beef, and this is how you would approach creating a crispy piece of Mongolian beef. It's actually what makes Mongolian beef so unique, and that is because Mongolian beef is coated in cornstarch before it's seared. So usually that's done with something like Angus steak, usually probably more commonly in Chinese food. That's going to be flank steak because it's very, very cheap. That's why Chinese people use it, by the way. And then what's happening in Mongolian beef is that stuff is going to be seared with a coating of cornstarch on the side. So that's why it has that like really, really crisp exterior quality to it, is because of the way that it's seared. For our version today, what we're going to do is do that, except we're going to do it with tofu, and it's going to be how we achieve this really, really crispy piece of tofu because of that cornstarch coating. So what's essentially going to happen is as we sear the cornstarch, is this 2 pieces of tofu? Yeah. As we sear, the first thing that sears is, before the tofu sears, is going to be the cornstarch. So when we bite into it, it's going to have this really, really crisp quality to it, because the first thing that you bite into is not actually the tofu. It's going to be that crisp cornstarch, sort of like a deep fry, except without the deep fry. It's like a deep fry without the deep fry, put it that way. So this is extra firm tofu. This is the firmest form of tofu that we can find. Lots of times you'll see tofu thrown around. I will often go out of my way of using firm tofu unless I have a very, very specific plan for how to use firm tofu, and that is because the texture of it is really, really terrible. Unless you plan on searing the crap out of it like we're going to do, I usually will avoid using firm tofu because it's going to be really, really chewy. Firm tofu by itself, if you eat it raw, it's going to be a really, really chewy bite, and it's going to be pretty gross. Otherwise, I'll probably opt for either medium or even like softer silken tofu. It make you hungry? Yeah, cool. That's my goal. You wonder why it's called Mongolian? Yeah, I looked that up too. So we did a whole recipe video for this for our Mongolian beef. We actually did 2 recipes in that original video where we were loosely inspiring or loosely hacking the P.F. Chang's Mongolian beef. That's what we were doing in that original recipe. And I looked into why is it called Mongolian beef. Because it has nothing to do with Mongolia. So that's the real trick, is that because Mongolian beef has no origins from Mongolia, so why do we call it Mongolian beef? And the answer is nobody knows. It's just a thing. It actually originates from Hong Kong and like Hong Kong street food. And I don't know why it's called Mongolian beef. Because it really has nothing to do with Mongolia. It has nothing in common with Mongolian cuisine, nor does really anything from Chinese food have anything in common with Mongolian cuisine. There's probably some weird racism going on there. Yeah. But yeah, I looked all over the internet to find out why is it called Mongolian beef. It has no origins from Mongolia. The other thing I found, we also did another recipe for Singaporean noodles, Singapore street noodles, which, just like Mongolian beef, has no origins from Singapore whatsoever. It has nothing to do with Singaporean cuisine. It actually comes from Hong Kong street food, just like Mongolian beef, which is weird, and like, why bother calling it that? And then, like, if you keep digging, there is also something called Hong Kong street noodles, which is a completely different thing. So it makes you wonder, like, why is Singapore street noodles called Singapore street noodles and not just Hong Kong street noodles? And then why is there another dish called Hong Kong street noodles? It's just a whole rabbit hole, which I encourage you to go track down yourself. Because it's a very interesting rabbit hole. If you ever have the chance, look up the Wikipedia articles for Mongolian beef and Singapore street noodles and the origins of both of those two things, because it's fucking crazy. Oh, can we make fried tofu chips? Yeah, and we actually did something very similar to that. What essentially is fried tofu chips. So a couple of weeks ago, I think that was like maybe a month ago or so, I did a recipe for a cho tofu, which is I think you like colloquially will see it referred to in the States at least as stinky tofu, which is because it's essentially a fermented tofu that's fried into a chip. It's basically like you eat it with your hand. Comes from Chinese or Taiwanese, probably Taiwanese street food. Probably I've mainly eaten it in Taiwanese street food, but it probably has some origins from Hong Kong because it is a very, very old dish. And that would probably be the closest thing that I have done so far to a tofu chip, because we also did like a dipping sauce. It was did the whole thing, so it was a tofu chip, and then we did a dipping sauce that was based in oyster sauce. Neither of which are things that I invented. They both come from Chinese or Taiwanese cuisine. My most viewed video is about Mongolian beef. Is it really? That's I did not know that was the most viewed video, but I'll have to go check that out. I know that people have been super stoked about the P.F. Chang's videos, so those are fun. That video, by the way, is part of a whole series that we've been doing, where we've been sort of like deconstructing a lot of like Chinese, like classic Chinese foods. So things like Mongolian beef or General Tso's chicken, stuff like that, and kind of taking them apart and seeing like what are the like really, really American qualities of Chinese American cuisine dishes like that, and sort of like reassembling them and taking a look at what those dishes would look like if we cooked them through the lens of like what traditional Chinese wok cooking would actually look like, which is always really interesting with some of those dishes like Mongolian beef, because a lot of those things actually do exist. Mongolian beef does come from Hong Kong, so it actually does have real origins in Chinese cuisine. Whereas like other stuff, sort of like say General Tso's chicken on for example, has no real origins from Chinese cuisine. It just comes from America. So when you take those things apart, it's really interesting because what you end up with is basically just an American fried chicken, which is interesting. So if you're interested, there's a whole series dedicated to that. I think that series is up to like 10 or 15 videos now. We've done a whole bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of stuff from the Panda Express menu. There's a whole bunch of stuff from the PF Chang's menu. It kind of just keeps going. So what I'm doing right now, so by the way, this is shrimp. I just talked through this whole thing. What I'm doing right now, this is our shrimp. I just took all of the shells off of our shrimp without acknowledging that I'm working on some shrimp right now. And then next what I'm doing is we're deveining our shrimp. So you really want to be using a paring knife with this, unless you're really, really good with a chef's knife. I'm pretty good. I don't think I can do this with a chef's knife because they're way too long. So we're using a paring knife, and then we're pulling out the vein of our shrimp here. You don't have to do this. You can leave the poop vein in if you want. The vein of your shrimp, it's actually not a vein. What it is it's the poop track of the shrimp. So it's where all of their like bile lives. Mostly what it is though, it's really just sand. So if you're not super disgusted by it, you can leave it in. I think it's kind of weird and gross to leave this part in. So we're gonna take it out. Also, we're not doing that many shrimp. But if I was cooking like a whole couple hundred shrimp, I would probably just leave it in. Yeah. Is it possible to leave the shrimp whole? Yeah. So I had gone back and forth on this in a couple of the videos because we've done shrimp in a couple of videos now because we just did honey sesame shrimp. We just did this video. What else? Singapore street noodles also has shrimp, and I had gone back and forth on whether or not to shell the shrimp. So basically, the pros and cons. So if you leave the shell on, what it's essentially doing is it's protecting the shrimp from overcooking. So this is particularly important in a wok cook because you're facing some really, really aggressive heat. So if you're not careful with the way that you cook the shrimp, it can overcook really quickly, and that's like kind of the pitfall of what a lot of people end up doing when they're cooking with shrimp is you overcook it because it overcooks really, really, really quick. Like shrimp can overcook in under a minute, which is why you can oftentimes, when you're say eating it in hot pot, you'll just throw it into the soup. Like literally just throw raw shrimp into the soup, and the residual heat of the soup will cook the shrimp. That's how delicate they are. So if you leave the shrimp shells on, hypothetically what you could do is protect the shrimp from overcooking so quickly, and then you end up with a more tender piece of shrimp. Is technically true. The downside to that is that when it's on your plate, you now have to shell your shrimp, which is super annoying. And I find that to be a kind of an unpleasant eating experience because you have to deal with shelling the shrimp, which is really, really annoying. So for me personally, what I like to do is I don't think there's a single recipe that uses shrimp on the Who Can Cook channel that uses unshelled shrimp because I find it really annoying, and I don't actually understand what is the strategy with unshelled shrimp when it's on your plate already. So unless it's so there's like Chinese garlic shrimp, for example, where it's literally just a plate of shrimp. And your whole thing that you're doing with that dish is just shelling shrimp, and that's usually what you end up doing. You spend half the meal just shelling the shrimp, and then I always remember when I was a kid, my mom would shell the shrimp for everybody, and then would just eat the shrimp that she was shelling because everybody was too lazy to deal with the shells. So. But unless you're doing that, I find the strategy for how you're supposed to eat that stuff to be really, really annoying. That's definitely a personal gripe. If you don't mind it, it absolutely has a lot of benefits to cooking, but it's definitely a personal gripe for me. All right. Just nothing. Listen to me talk is mesmerizing. That's good because I certainly talk a lot on these. All right. So next up, this is fresh chow fun. Chow fun being a Chinese term, it is definitely chow fun because I got it at a Chinese market. You'll see it called a number of different things. What we're essentially using though is fresh rice noodles. That's what fresh chow fun is indicating. Fresh as in it needs to be made today. If it wasn't made today, it's not fresh, and you never want to buy this stuff a day old because it's going to be all kinds of problems. So what I used to do is I used to like use 8 ounces or 12 ounces, or would use a portion of it and try and save part of it for another occasion. Maybe you could maybe freeze it and hypothetically reuse it, but it's really, really annoying and borderline impossible to actually deal with the fallout of having leftover noodles. Yeah, it's borderline impossible to deal with having leftover noodles. Excuse me, my TV just randomly turned on. That was weird. My TV just turned on by nobody. Anyway, yeah, it's borderline impossible to try and repurpose those noodles once they're a day old. So at this point, when I use these noodles, and this is also true for any time that you'll see a recipe that's using these noodles, we're going to use all of them. So this is 16 ounces or a single pound. We're going to use all 16 ounces. Today we're actually going to use, this is going to be 2 pounds because we're doubling. Paul, you're curious about this one? Yeah, toasted tofu. Yeah. So my mission with partially, this is kind of like partially floating around the vein of the vegetarian series that we've been doing, where I've been like the whole mission to that series has been dedicated to like finding actually tasty ways of using tofu, which is like a big thing in Chinese cuisine. Is that like so like if you cook enough vegetarian cuisine, so if you cook for your vegetarian roommates enough, you start to have this misnomer that tofu is bland and gross and tastes gross, which is absolutely not true. It just has to do with the way that it's treated. And in a lot of vegetarian cuisine, you'll find that it's treated as a meat substitute, which is the inherent problem with all of the treatments of tofu that I have seen that come from most vegetarian cuisine. Is that it's being used as some form of meat substitute, which it will never work as a meat substitute because it's not meat. So it's never going to behave like meat. It doesn't have the same texture as chicken. It's not going to taste like steak. All of those things, that's the inherent problem with vegetarian cuisine that's using tofu as a meat substitute, is that it's not going to behave like meat. So for a lot of the tofu-based recipes that we're working on in the Wu Can Cook series, it's really just about like kind of deriving what is like recipes that are from their origin built for tofu, and kind of like working from the ground up from tofu. And that's like a big part of like Chinese cuisine is how tofu is used. Comes from like entire recipes that are built around tofu, and like never at any point was it meant to be used with meat. So like for example, the dish that I think about a lot, or the two dishes that I think about a lot, are Hong Sao tofu and Wusu tofu, both of which are essentially like braised tofu with like a long braise and some sort of like dark sauce, and that's like the way that I foresee or look at like the treatment of tofu in Chinese cuisine is about like finding recipes that are built around tofu. So it was never meant to be for meat, which means that the way that it's cooked, the way that you treat tofu is completely different because you're not approaching it like tofu at all. So the whole idea behind like how we're approaching a crispy tofu pad thai like we are today is based off of the fact that at no point in time was this ever intended for chicken. So the way that we're approaching it has nothing to do with the way we actually have done chicken pad thai before, and the way that we're doing it has no similarity whatsoever to how we would approach chicken pad thai, which is how we ended up with coating in cornstarch, which actually comes from well, a couple of things, one of which is Mongolian beef, the other of which is inspired by the way that we did the Hong Sao tofu, which is deep fried, coated in cornstarch and then deep fried. With COVID starting out, will I ever start the band again? Yeah, actually, so we've got a couple of shows coming up. The next show, we're doing an event in June. Most of the stuff that we're doing right now is private events or ticketed events. Mostly because of attendance, and we have to like be very careful with like how many people are actually there. So we can't. What we used to be doing a lot of would be like playing in bars and stuff, and just kind of like open door. You come in and drink, and we're the band playing there. That was like the big thing that Tracer Pete was doing pre-COVID. That doesn't super work out well anymore, because what that was relying on was like the idea that you can pack a whole shitload of people into a bar, which you can't really do anymore. So most of what we're doing now is either ticketed events or private events that don't have invites, or have like very, very controlled invites, because we have to be very, very controlled about like who's actually coming to the event. which is very different now. So yeah, short answer, yeah, we are doing stuff, but it looks super different. It's a very different experience than when we were doing stuff pre-COVID, kind of like re-strategizing. Yeah. All right, so I'm sorry I just talked through all of this, but fortunately we're doing 2 whole pounds of chow fun right now. What we're doing, so this is fresh chow fun. Fresh chow fun is very, very delicate. It is usually sold in a brick, and it's usually going to be sold and coated in oil, which is why there's oil all over my hands right now. What I'm doing is I'm pulling the noodles apart because we don't want to be doing this on heat, which is what I used to do, and which is why the noodles were always problematic. If you find yourself doing this on heat, so if you try and break these noodles apart on heat, what's going to happen is, unless you can like get your hands in there and do exactly what we're doing right now, those noodles are going to start breaking apart. So because they're so delicate, if they start breaking apart, that's how you end up with like broken fragments of chow fun in your noodles. So if you're ever at a Thai restaurant and you order pad Thai or pad siu, pad kimao, one of those dishes that are using these fresh noodles, and you see there's like a whole bunch of broken noodles kind of floating around. That's because it was cooked incorrectly, or like the noodles were handled in a really lazy way. So what we want to do is, before these are into the wok, these should be pulled apart, because you don't want to be pulling these apart on heat, otherwise they're going to break apart. This is specifically just for fresh chow fun. If you're not able to get fresh chow fun, so by the way, if you are using this stuff, it has to be purchased the day of. So I bought this earlier today, I think like 5-6 hours ago, literally. It has to be purchased the day of, and usually you want to make sure that wherever you bought it made it that day. So I happen to live down the street from a noodle shop that makes these things daily, or at least stocks them daily. Most of the time, if you live near a Chinatown, you're going to have another grocery store that does the same thing, that is stocking, at the very least, stocking these things every day, because wherever you are in Chinatown, there's a restaurant that is serving this stuff, and those restaurants are stocking it from those grocery stores. So if you are near Chinatown, you should be able to find this stuff relatively easily. If you can't find it, there's also a pantry stable option, which is, I think you'll probably see it called like dried rice stick or something to that effect, which is essentially a dried rice noodle. It is sort of like the difference between like handmade fresh pasta, Italian pasta, and like dried spaghetti. Whereas they're essentially the same thing. You can absolutely use them interchangeably, but one is obviously much better because it's fresh. So if you can't find it, get the pantry stable stuff. You'll be just fine. But if you can find it, get the fresh stuff, and it's going to be a lot better, or even more better, I should say. All right, so here's our noodles. We're taking very good care of like making sure to pull apart all of these big chunks. We don't want to leave big chunks like noodles stuck together like this, because if they're stuck together, then it's going to break apart in the wok fry, and then we're going to end up with broken fragments of chow fun. Not what we want. Cool. So now that these are broken apart, we'll be able to drop them into the wok without worrying about them sticking together. This tofu. Next up, I'm going to circle back to our tofu here and get to our cornstarch coating. Well, running out of bowls. All right. So I've never been super particular about the quantity of cornstarch, mostly because what we're paying attention to is not the amount of cornstarch that you're using in something like this, as much as we are paying attention to how thoroughly the cornstarch is coating our tofu. So here's an indiscriminate amount of tofu, cornstarch, that we're combining with our tofu here. Trying not to drop stuff. And then what we're going to do is essentially just dust the cornstarch across our tofu here. I'm also low on cornstarch, which is a little bit of a problem, but I think we'll be okay. This is not the right bowl for this, by the way. If you're trying to do this, what you should be using is a wide, flat bowl. All of my large bowls are in the kitchen right now. So now we got to do it this way. All right. So we're, I guess you could call that a double breading. Basically what I'm doing is I'm tossing our tofu in our cornstarch after an initial toss. I don't know that that's necessarily a double breading, but I guess it does count. And essentially what we're trying to make sure of is just that our tofu has a light coating of cornstarch. It doesn't need to be super thick, but it does need to be relatively coated. And what that's going to do is, because the tofu is soaked in water, it's also going to start soaking up a lot of the water that our tofu is covered in, which is going to help dry it out, which is also going to give us a more crisp quality to our tofu. So anytime that we're searing, by the way, what we're looking for is the driest possible scenario. And that's going to be true for any protein. This is especially true with tofu because tofu is so wet, but that's also true with things like chicken or steak or any kind of protein really, is that what we want to do is try and pull out as much moisture from our tofu or protein as possible, because when we get to frying, if you don't pull out that moisture, the first thing that your fry is going to do is work on burning off that liquid first, which is not what we want. We want our fry to be focused on frying, not burning moisture. So even if we weren't doing this cornstarch coating, the first thing that I would do is make sure that our tofu is dry, and that's like what you're trying to do when you press tofu dry, or if you like pat it dry. Sometimes you might see paper towels coming into play, things like that. That's essentially what we're doing, is just trying to dry the tofu out. So I tried to get away with a shortcut. It didn't quite work out. But ideally, if you have a wide and flat enough bowl, what you should be able to do is just toss the cornstarch into the tofu. And if the bowl is spreading the tofu out properly, it should allow you to just do this all at once. If you don't have a wide and flat bowl like me, then you have to go and do it one at a time. Not the end of the world. Alright, so there's our tofu. It should look relatively the same, but it has a thin layer of cornstarch going on here, which is going to be really, really important to the way that we sear this stuff. This wok is going to be super hot. Yeah, exactly. So the idea being is that because we just pulled so much moisture out of our tofu, our wok is going to be able to stay very, very hot for more time than it would be if we were leaving it to sort of like burn off a lot of moisture first. Alright, just dropped an egg, so pick that up. Alright, so this is what should be 5 eggs. We're going to whisk these up real quick. These are going to be the last thing to go into our stir fry. What we're going to do is go around the surface area of the wok later on, and that's going to do 2 things. The first thing we're going to look for is a nice egg-coated noodle, but then the second and also very important thing that we're looking for is big egg curds, so that we have nice chunks of eggs worked into nice egg-coated noodles at the same time. Both of them at the same time. Cool. Next up, so this is some bean sprouts. We're not going to do much with it, just going to give it a quick rinse. especially if you buy your produce. I say this a lot, and people disagree with me a lot, but I'm going to keep saying it. Especially if you buy your produce in Chinatown where people are picking through it, wash that stuff. It's super gross. Chinatown produce, very gross. They're literally selling it on the sidewalk, so why wouldn't you wash the produce? Or at the very least, if you're not going to wash it with soap, give it a rinse, and that's at the very, very least, at the bare minimum, it's going to rinse off the literal quantities of dirt that are covering your produce. So you're actually eating dirt when you don't even rinse your produce. All right. So there's our bean sprouts. A real quick rinse to it. I actually washed it too. Yeah, let's use a bowl for this. Last thing that we're going to do is assemble our sauce base here. So in a lot of the early videos that we had done with pad thai, I was not able to find two ingredients specifically, which are the two ingredients that are like the really, really authentic, or really, really critical and authentic ingredients to like an authentic pad thai. The number one thing is tamarind paste, and the number two thing is going to be palm sugar, which looks like this. You probably see it sold in blocks. I actually got this out of a jar earlier before I started the stream and put it into a bowl. It is rock solid, so it is like, it doesn't move. So when you get it into a microwave safe container, mine was in a glass, probably not, I think it was in like a plastic bowl. What we want to do is heat that stuff up. So if you're really like interested in like doing stuff super pro, you can throw that into a double boiler, maybe put it in a bowl, and then put that bowl inside of some water, some boiling water, and that will melt it. What I'm just doing right now is I just threw that in the microwave because I'm lazy. Just like when I defrost meat in the microwave. And what it should do is give us this nice liquid formed palm sugar. So if you can't find palm sugar, by the way, you can use the same thing that we've been using this entire time. The last like 2 years that we've been doing pad thai, you can just use brown sugar. It will work just fine. But if you can get your hands on palm sugar, it's going to be a game changer. Then next up, this is going to be what should be 4 tablespoons or a quarter cup of tamarind paste. I'm going to use 8 tablespoons because I'm doubling. There's our tamarind paste. Very, very often, if you can't find tamarind paste, you'll see things made by places, stuff like Lee Kum Kee and things that make like sauce elements, using things like pad thai sauce, which is essentially using tamarind paste but combining it with a couple of other things. Usually that involves things like sugar, sometimes fish sauce, sometimes like cumin. I've seen a lot of salt and a lot of just like pure white sugar added to that stuff. So if you can't find tamarind paste, that is absolutely a good option. If you can find tamarind paste, it is very, very useful because that stuff is packed with so much sugar, which is why most of the time when you're making pad thai, what you're battling against is trying to correct the quantity of sugar that exists in that pre-mixed stuff. So if you can find tamarind paste, what it's doing is it's enabling you to use all of these other sweet ingredients that we're using right now that we otherwise would not be able to do because it would make the pad thai too sweet. So what I just used was a bunch of fish sauce, and then earlier that was some oyster sauce, and then finally obviously our tamarind or palm sugar, none of which we would be able to use if we were not able to get this stuff, get our tamarind paste. You know, lazy people, and I'm not one. Yeah, I guess that's true. But they're definitely the microwave has its purposes, and usually when I find myself using the microwave, it's because I'm being lazy for some reason or another, and that's definitely one of them. Defrosting meat, that's one of them for sure. And also just like melting stuff or bringing stuff to temperature like milk, or anytime that we're trying to boil stuff that I don't feel like boiling. All right, so that's our sauce mixture here. We're gonna move over to our stove and get to work on searing some tofu here. All right, so over on the stove, I'm heating up my wok. We're gonna get that thing ripping hot, and then we can start searing our tofu next. Yeah, it's a tool like anything else, and it has its uses. That's true. That's absolutely true. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST. Most of the time, like today, we're cooking through a recipe that came out on my YouTube channel last Friday. So last Friday, we came out with a recipe for a crispy tofu pad thai, which is a tofu pad thai that is done with... It's cooked in the style of Mongolian beef, which is essentially a protein that is coated in cornstarch and then seared, which is how you get that quality of Mongolian beef. If you've ever had Mongolian beef, it has a couple of things that are notable about it. It's not just Angus steak. It is really, really crispy on the exterior, like more crispy than it should be. And then also very, very tender. So that's a combination of a couple of things. Number one has to do with the way that it's seared, because it's seared for a brief amount of time, but long enough for it to become crispy. And then also number two, because of that coating of cornstarch, which is what we're using. And that results in this really, really crisp, but also really, really tender piece of steak. In our case, we're going to do that with some tofu. By the way, if you haven't found those things yet, definitely head over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. Those are out every Friday, and then most of the time, if there are things that I can cook for dinner, we'll be cooking through it on Tuesday, which is today. It's also a good place to go if you're looking for the schedule of live streams, because we've got a whole schedule of stuff that we're going to be cooking. So if you want to, you can cook along with us, which is always super fun. Cool. We're also working our way up to 6,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and do that. All right, so into our wok right now, that's going to be about a 1/4 cup of oil. Then we're going to give ourselves a nice long yao. Let's start searing some tofu. So you'll notice if you've ever tried to sear tofu without cornstarch on it, this would probably be sizzling aggressively, like it would be spitting water out and like hot oil everywhere, which is not what's happening. And that's because our cornstarch has dried our tofu out pretty substantially. We're also being careful. We're not just dropping this all in. I'm being very specific with the way that our tofu is laying down. We're adding it to the wok with the most surface area in contact with the wok surface as possible. And that's just going to sort of maximize, so we don't want that. We don't want it standing up like that. It's going to sort of maximize the amount of crisping that we can get out of our tofu. Look at that. And then if you're using a round bottom wok like I am, we're going to kind of like continually go back to the wok and give it a little bit of a rotation like so. And that's just going to sort of like redistribute the oil. That tends to be a problem in round bottom woks because the oil just sort of pulls up at the center where it's rounding out. If you've got a flat bottom surface, like a cast iron skillet or something, you can totally use that. I like to just be lazy about it, mostly because I just don't feel like cooking or cleaning the second pan. But that's just me. It's definitely the reason why I do so many things in a wok, though. I also, by the way, just added a little bit more oil because it was looking a little bit low and kind of like not quite lubricating the way I'd like it to. Today, by the way, we're using that's grapeseed oil. If you're sticking to the books, especially because we're going to be using peanuts later on, if you're sticking to a really traditional wok fry, this should actually be using peanut oil. I forgot to buy peanut oil. I actually haven't had peanut oil on hand in quite a while, and kind of just stopped using it mostly out of like not being careful about making sure I have peanut oil. Generally speaking, when I'm cooking, we want to have at least one other oil other than peanut oil because it's not a super versatile oil. So usually what I have on hand is going to be grapeseed oil because it's a good neutral oil. But choose for yourselves accordingly. Cool. Let's see. Okay, in the meantime, while that's going, let's take a look at our peanuts, which I forgot to do. Dropped some of them. All right, so what we're doing is, in previous iterations, I have absolutely used raw peanuts. If you are so inclined, you can use raw peanuts and just toss them in the wok. I had mentioned this earlier too, but that's always a really good way of learning how to wok toss because it's like a really, really consistent feel to the wok. Today I'm being lazy and I happened to find these at the grocery store while I was there picking up the noodles. So these are just these are some garlic peanuts, which is essentially, pretty sure, peanuts tossed in garlic powder. And then what we're doing is just giving it a crush. If you can't find this stuff though, or if you can't find raw peanuts, you can just straight up use planter peanuts, any kind of peanuts that you want. And I'm pretty sure, I feel fairly confident in saying you can, many restaurants are doing the same thing. I've definitely been to plenty of Thai restaurants that are just straight up using Planters peanuts. I think I've even seen tins of Planters peanuts in some of those Thai restaurants. All right, let's head back over here. Cool. So our tofu, this is going to go, I want to say, about 5 minutes on the first side, and then the second side is going to go a lot faster. But we want to give it a good amount of time on its first side because that's going to be while the wok is still heating up. Like adapt the tofu that's dropped into it. Over time, you kind of develop a sort of intuition about it. But what I'm really looking for here is I'm paying attention to the sides of our tofu. As it starts browning, usually the first sign that you'll see it browning is on its sides and towards the edges of the tofu. Because obviously, it's not going to brown on the side facing up. Cool. Alright, that's looking good. We're ready to start flipping. I want to try and avoid that from happening, where all of the tofu just sort of sticks together in a brick like that. That's generally not a good thing that we want to avoid from happening, because we want these to be in obviously separate pieces of tofu, but also not the end of the world. You can just break it apart. Yeah. Tofu looks yummy. Yeah, this is one of my favorite ways of doing tofu. It is, by the way, inspired by a couple of things. First, definitely inspired by the way that you would do a Mongolian beef, but I was also just thinking about it, and definitely one of the big ways, one of the big things that I was thinking about when I developed this recipe was the idea of how you sort of assemble doing a cornstarch coating to a piece of tofu in a dish like a hong sao tofu, which is something very, very similar, but it usually would be done in a deep fry rather than a shallow fry, like what we're doing right now. If we were deep frying it, it would look a little bit different because the cornstarch itself would be frying more consistently, or more like holistically and consistently, and we would also be able to do a lot more at one time. I also don't think when you do a cornstarch coating in a hong sao tofu that you would end up with something nearly as crispy, because you wouldn't have surface area frying. So you would end up with, usually when you do a hong sao tofu, you would end up with something a little bit more toothsome, kind of a little bit chewy. That's sort of like the texture that you're looking for with a hong sao tofu. In our case, because we have the surface area of the wok hitting that wok surface, what you're going to end up with is something a lot crispier, more like what we end up with today. So obviously, because we did not season the tofu with anything, we're kind of abandoning the idea of getting something tasty from our tofu, and more leaning into the idea that what we're looking for really is texture. We're going for texture rather than huge amounts of flavor. Perfect. Alright, so I'm going to dive right in and do our dry racking that stuff. When you are searing in a wok, by the way, you generally want to try and avoid overloading the wok, so it's going to be super tempting to just sort of throw everything in and be lazy about it. You definitely don't want to fill up your wok unless you're on a wok burner, and even if you are on a wok burner, probably don't want to do that either. Is you don't want to try and fill up the entire surface area of the wok, because if you do that, especially on a home burner, it's going to end up losing heat, and you're going to have fill the whole wok up. As tempting as that might be. Cool. While that's going, let's take a look at our finished tofu. Ideally, as soon as possible, this tofu should be getting onto a dry rack. So I got lazy and went ahead and started the second batch. But what we want to do is get this onto a dry rack because, of course, we don't want it to just be like sitting on a surface like it is in this bowl right now, because it will eventually get soggy. We might need more dry rack space here. So there's our tofu. Take a look. So here's what we're looking for. Yeah, this is a pretty good representation. Ooh, we're out of focus. The autofocus on this camera is struggling hard. But what we're looking for is this very, very crisp piece of tofu. And it's got a nice crisp texture to it. But on the interior, especially if you can tell when you squeeze it, still very, very tender, even more tender than it was when it was raw, because firm tofu is super rubbery, which is not what we want in our tofu ever. So this is, I think, is going to take 3 batches. So we're gonna 3 sets of tofu going on here. So this is our second batch, and then we'll finish up. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So if you have not yet checked out the YouTube channel, that's where all of our recipes live, including the recipe for this pad thai. Most of the time when we're cooking stuff on Tuesdays, it's usually going to be cooking through the recipe that came out on Tuesday. So this pad thai recipe came out a couple of days ago, last Friday, on the YouTube channel, inspired by a restaurant that serves a really, really good looking pad thai that usually features lobster tail, which I skipped because I did not get around to buying lobster tail. That's going to be really expensive. Good quality lobster tail is going to be like 50, 60 bucks, and I didn't feel like paying that. So what we're doing today is we're going to be doing some prawn pad thai, which is with some shrimp and some really, really crisp looking tofu. So for the purposes of today, we're exploring different ways of creating a very, very crispy piece of tofu. So usually when I approach tofu, I'm looking at 2 different things. We're either going to go for texture or we're going to go for flavor. If you're going to go for flavor, it's going to be a long and very uphill battle most of the time, because tofu inherently doesn't taste like anything. So most of the time when you're battling on how to impart flavor to tofu, you're going to have to do a couple of things. The only way that I have ever successfully made tofu itself taste like something is with long fermentation. So The way that we had achieved that in our stinky tofu recipe was with a 48-hour fermentation in other fermented tofu. So it was literally tofu that was fermented in other fermented tofu. That has so far been the only way that I have ever achieved making tofu taste like anything. The other ways that you generally would achieve that is doing some kind of long braise, which is essentially coating the tofu in something that tastes like something like a really, really thick sauce. So that would be like a hongsao tofu or wusu tofu, something braised, something like that. And that's a lot of the Chinese cuisine that you see is focused around tofu. It does that. That's also like how mapo tofu is done, which is not technically making the tofu taste like something. It's just like covering a bland and tasteless protein in stuff that tastes like things. Kind of a cheating way of achieving something, but I guess still technically the same result by the end product. Today, instead of trying to make it taste like something, what we're going to do is we're going for texture. So we're going specifically going to be focusing on making sure that our tofu is super, super crispy, sort of a nice texture addition to our pad thai, rather than trying to make it flavorful. Flavor from everything else. Cool, so that's our tofu. We're gonna give that a quick flip. Generally on the second side, I like to give it a little bit less time because the wok is spending less energy on heating up the tofu. So that's like a big part of how searing works. Kind of think about just like basic physics. The wok is very, very hot with very, very hot oil in it. As you put cold things into it, the wok's oil's temperature is gonna start dropping. And as that starts dropping, it takes longer and longer for it to sear, which is why it takes much longer on the first side to try and sear stuff, because when you put the protein into the wok, it's dropping the temperature of the oil. So the first thing that it's doing when it's searing is reheating that oil, because you're trying to overcome the fact that you just put a bunch of cold stuff into the wok. So when you flip it, you're not actually battling the problem of you just threw a whole bunch of cold stuff in there, which means that you have a much hotter wok, which means that it's going to take a lot less time to sear. Logic. All right. So just like on the here, though, we are giving the wok a good rotation, and that's just sort of like redistributing the oil here a little bit. Cool. Let's start pulling stuff. All right, here's our third and final batch of tofu going in. tofu though.
Yeah. There it is. All right, let's give that one more round, and then we'll get to our stir fry. All right, back over on the cutting board. Here's our second batch of tofu. We're definitely gonna need a second dry rack here. All right. You volunteer if anyone needs to sample, yeah. Wish I could mail this stuff. Wonder how illegal that is. All right. Almost there. All right, let's get going. I'm hungry. All right, let's get on with our stir fry. My spatula. Whoa. So going in, followed by our ginger, which always burns out on the stove camera. I don't know how to color correct that without burning out. And lastly, here's our Thai chilies going in. As always, when we're working with Thai chilies, want to make sure those windows are open, because that's going to for sure start kicking up capsaicin into the air. We're going to letting those go in first. Usually for about 10-15 seconds, what we're looking for is some nice aromatic and fragrant qualities. Next up, here's our what should be shallots. Let's pretend those are shallots and not onions. Followed by our carrots. We're just going to go ahead and let those go in. So if we were doing smaller quantities, actually, you know what? I think we might be able to get away without a batch cook. Generally speaking, when I see the wok starting to fill up like this, this is about as much stuff as we want in our wok at any one given time. If it starts filling up more than that, that's generally a sign that we're on our way to losing heat in our wok, which is a big problem. That's how you end up with mushy stir fries. In our case, I think we'll be okay today. I think we can get out of having to do a batch cook here, mostly because I think we're just about done cooking. There's not much else to cook here. But if you ever notice that you have too many things into the wok and you still have other stuff to cook, so like for example, if we still had to cook more veggies, if there was an onion going in still, or still had to cook tofu or proteins, stuff like that, that would be a problem because you wouldn't have enough heat in the wok to try and cook those things. You're going to end up cooking them on low heat, which is not hot enough. In our case today, this should be just fine. But we do notice, if you ever at any point hear that the wok stops sizzling, we have a pretty good sizzle going on. Yeah, but if you ever notice that the wok stops sizzling or you don't have a really aggressive sizzle, that's a bad sign. You're on your way to low heat. And very easy to remedy that. You can either start removing stuff from the wok, or if you don't feel like removing stuff, you can also just stop moving the wok. So stop tossing, stop moving things around, stop shuffling, and it will reheat on its own. Although there's only so much that you can do before it doesn't reheat anymore. So be careful about overloading your wok. So here's our shrimp going in. Those shrimp, again, have very, very little time in the wok. So we're not going to give it very much time. That's what we're throwing it in so late. Same with these bean sprouts. We don't want bean sprouts to cook for too long because they'll eventually start shedding their water. Once they start shedding their water, bean sprouts will eventually just turn into nothing. So we don't want that to happen. Because if they give out too much water, then you're left with nothing. It will just disappear. Or worse, you'll have a soggy bean sprout, which is never what we're looking for. So I'm just giving this a little bit of time. I want to give it like maybe 20-30 seconds. And that's just enough time for those shrimp to pick up a little bit of color. Not a lot of color, but a little bit of color. Then next, here's our noodles going in. We're going to do this a handful at a time, along with a little bit of salt at a time, and a toss. Dumping stuff in is because, number one, the chow fun will absolutely start clumping together, so we don't want this all to be going in at once. Otherwise, we're going to end up with big lumps of chow fun, what we're after. But also, by adding it a little bit at a time and adding a little bit of sauce and tamarind bits at a time. It like helps things coat a little bit better and get a when we're cooking huge quantities like this. Once these noodles are in the wok, by the way, we're going to stop doing any real aggressive tossing. We're not shaking, we're not moving things around super aggressively. No more of that. We don't want to be aggressively tossing stuff anymore because it will definitely start breaking up those noodles if we're not careful. A little bit of our palm sugar sticking together. All right, last up, here's our tofu going back in. At this point, by the way, we have definitely lost diesel. There's not a lot of heat going on in our wok, but that is totally okay for our point at this point because we're not really cooking anything anymore. At this point, really what we're just doing is mixing stuff. So if you wanted to, this could even be just in a very hot bowl, basically. We still have to cook our eggs, I guess, but if we were still stir-frying stuff, it would be a big problem, but right now, because there's nothing left to cook, there's no way that we can be in danger of underheating because there's nothing to heat anymore. I'm letting those eggs go around the sides of the wok, and then what we're going to do is let that set for a couple of seconds. I'm going to give it maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. And that's just going to give us a little bit of egg curd going on here before we start mixing. So that's going to do two things. That's going to give us those nice big egg curds from the eggs that are making contact with the wok surface on the sides. But then as we start tossing, that's also going to give us some nice egg-coated noodles here. All right, at this point, we're really just letting those noodles set, and then we should be ready. should do it. So at this point, pretty much everything should be cooked. Hopefully everything should be cooked. You'll notice that we did not really do much to cook our shrimp. They should be fully cooked by now. And most of that happened on residual heat. There was really no intentional cooking. We pretty much just let things add or combine. And that's really it. All right, so generally speaking, I try and avoid scrubbing the wok too much because I know that I find that it sort of gets in the way of the patina of the wok. In today's case, and generally any time that I find myself cooking eggs, I find that I do end up having to do a little bit of scrubbing, and that's really just to get the egg off of the wok. It's not the end of the world if you have to scrub carbon steel. Nothing terrible is going to happen, although I do try and avoid it because I find that it starts getting in the way of the way that the carbon steel is giving you patina, or developing patina, I should say. That's a family-sized portion. Yeah, let me know how it goes, Paul. That sounds cool. Always super stoked to see folks trying the recipes. That's also why I think my favorite recipes on the channel are usually the simple ones, because they're the ones that I know that people are most likely going to try and attempt. That light at the top of the screen, by the way, that's flashing. That's a sign that we're running out of battery power on our camera. So. Here's our crushed peanuts going on top. Followed by just a little bit of cilantro. That's the first time in a while that we ran out of battery power, but this is also one of the longest streams that I've done in a really long time too, so. Also, I forgot to charge the camera. Cool! Alright, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. We're gonna hurry up and finish the stream before our camera dies. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So if you have not checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely head over there and check out what's going on. We've got new stuff coming out every Friday. So this Friday coming up is going to be a recipe for what I've always seen colloquially referred to as a Chinese donut or a Chinese savory donut, something to that effect. It's called a youtiao, which is kind of looks like a Chinese cruller or like a deep fried stick. Or like literally translates to oil stick, which is a terrible translation. But that recipe coming out this Friday, along with a bunch of other stuff every other Friday. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely head over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. We've got lots of fun stuff coming up. Also, if you're looking for all of the recipes, they always live over there. We're also working our way up to 6,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of cool stuff coming. Every Friday we have those long form recipes coming out, and then every Monday is when those short form recipes come out. If you know the channel from gift recipes, that's where those short 1 minute videos live. Always on the shorts, the YouTube shorts, and then every Wednesday that's when all of the music comes out. So that's all the Woo Cooks beats, all the music that's under the voiceovers every Wednesday. Cool. All right, thanks everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. It's so wonderful. June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste ya, I just wanna taste ya, watermelon sugar high.
It bothers me and I'm feeling unhappy. I just try and think of nice things when I'm happy. Let me see nice things. Daffodils, green meadows, raindrops on roses, whiskers on kittens, cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Well, good for you, I guess you moved on really easily. You found a new girl and it only took a couple weeks. Remember when you said that you wanted to give me the world? And good for you, I guess that you've been working on yourself. I guess the therapist I found for you, she really helped. Now you can be a better man for your brand new girl. Well, good for you, you look happy and healthy. Not me, if you ever cared to ask. Good for you, you're doing great out there without me, baby. Gotta wish that I could do that. I've lost my mind, I've spent the night crying on the floor of my bedroom. But you're so affected, I really don't get it. But I guess good for you.
Smooth like butter, like a criminal undercover. Don't pop like trouble, breaking into your heart like that. Cool shade stunner, yeah, owe it all to my mother. Hot like summer, yeah, I'm making you sweat like that. Ooh, when I look in the mirror, I'm not too hard to do. I got the superstar glow, so to the boogie line. I step right left to my beat. I like the moon right with me, baby. Know that I got that heat. Baby, shake it, stop your shit. Side step right left to my beat. Get it, let it roll.
Closed off from love, I didn't need the pain. Once or twice was enough, and it was all in vain. Time starts to pass before you know it, you're frozen. Ooh, but something happened for